Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are doing well. My name is Max Solomon, and I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the Elder Law section to our Laws Over Lunch webinar series. On behalf of the Elder Law section's membership committee, we have Mr. Joseph Ankis. I hear someone. Well, like I said, we have Mr. Joseph Ankes presenting on the introduction to attorney mental health. This is going to be course number 8403. And if you missed that later on, it is going to be in the webinar chat on your Zoom screens. And the actual PowerPoint that Joe's going to have on display is also going to be emailed later on after the program. So want to first tell everyone a little bit about Joe. Joe is an attorney who has billed thousands of hours, worked on all-night projects, same here, dealt with demanding clients, argued with irrational opposing counsel. We have so much in common, and understands the blessings and curses of the so-called attorney lifestyle. He is acutely aware of the elevated levels of anxiety, depression, substance use, bipolar disorder, and suicide in our legal communities. Joe earned his JD with honors from the law school on the other side of town at University of Florida, and his BA magna cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania Annenberg School of Communications. Not so coincidentally, he left big law in 1991 after a lived experience with anxiety and stress. He talks openly of his time as a lawyer and what he did to get help. After a full-time law practice and for over 30 years, Joe has been a legal recruiter for many of South Florida's leading law firms. He has placed over 600 attorneys, many of whom have shared their struggles with mental health challenges. In 2017, in response to the growing number of attorney suicides, Joe was selected to be a member of the Florida Bar's Special Committee on Mental Health and Wellness, which I currently am a member on, whose mandate in part was to offer mental health education to Florida's legal profession. On the special committee, Joe collaborated closely with members of Florida's judiciary, bar staff, and double board certified psychiatrists and other enthusiastic Florida attorneys like me in addressing the growing need for attorney mental health related education. Joe is also a nationally certified mental health first aid instructor and has taught hundreds of attorneys, judges, law students, and bar staff this valuable and potentially life-saving course. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Joe Ankes so that he can share with you the amazing information that he has shared with our Big Bar committee and help improve our entire section.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Max. And thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Danielle. And thanks to everybody that's attending this today. It really is a joy for me to be here. It is something I believe strongly in and something I have really advocated for since 2017, most notably. So thank you. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint, and we're going to talk a little bit about the introduction to attorney mental health and wellness. It's designed to be an overview, and it's designed to give everybody kind of the big picture. Some of the things we're going to talk about are going to be quite familiar. Other things might not be as familiar. But at the end of the presentation, I really hope that some, if not all of you, have learned something that you can use, perhaps to help yourself, a friend, a colleague, a family member. We could just simply say any other human being. So without that, let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay, here we go. So again, this is your introduction to mental health and wellness for the legal profession. Yes, I am Joe. I will be with you today. So what are we going to do? I basically break it down to four components. First is to kind of give you an overview, very general overview of the attorney mental health landscape. Then we're going to talk about the basics of some of the most, how to identify potential mental health challenges. We're going to talk about fundamentals of anxiety, depression, and substance use disorder, which not surprisingly are things that many attorneys are most likely to encounter. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health first aid, which is a course that I teach. And I'm also going to give you resources. Resources are very, very, very important. And I want to spend some time on that. So what are some of the basics to identify potential attorney mental health challenges? Some of the basics. Well, back in 2016, there was a flagship and seminal study done by the American Bar Association and the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. And sometimes people just shorthand it as the Hazelden report. But the bottom line is that 15,000 attorneys across 19 states were surveyed. And if we distill it into its fundamental components, what we found was roughly 30% struggle with some level of depression, 21% qualify as problem drinkers, and let's say 19 to 20% demonstrate symptoms of anxiety. Now, when it comes to statistics, what I always tell my audiences is this: they're just statistics. It's a snapshot in time, okay? And that's only what was reported. I'm not a gambling person, but I'm willing to bet you that the actual figures are higher, because there is so much we have to do to overcome the shame and the stigma of talking about it that there may be underreporting, okay? But this should clue us that our population is more likely, and in fact, the evidence supports we are much more likely than the general population to experience anxiety, depression, and substance use. Now, a logical question would be, why? Why is the legal profession saddled with this additional challenge? And there are five things we're going to talk about here. Basically, as you know, whether you're a transactional lawyer or a litigator, I happen to have done both, there are pressures because even transactions can become adversarial. We obviously know about litigations being an adversarial process, so that we have inherent pressures that really no other profession has. What I like to say about law and the practice of law is, other than armed combat, there's no other profession where the other side is really trying to get you, right? And so then we add on the pressure we have from the roles in our lives. We all have different roles, okay? I use me as an example. I am a dad. I am a husband. I am an adjunct professor. I'm a mental health first aid instructor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a legal recruiter, and I'm an amateur wood turner. Okay. I have different roles in my life, and we all have pressures that arise from those different roles. So now we're adding another layer to the cake. We move to physiology, genetics, and drug interactions. Congratulations. We are an organism. We are a living, breathing organism, just like the Constitution. And the reality is that we're all different. So our physiology, our genetics, the medications we take, the interactions that may occur, all of these things can add, again, another layer to the cake. And then, of course, how can we ignore COVID? I know we're past it, thank goodness. However, COVID has been pretty much uniformly defined as a mass trauma event, and it's fair to say that life did fundamentally change. And I would go so far as to say we really haven't begun to unpack the full amount of mental health challenges arising and related to COVID. So when you look at all these potential causes, it shouldn't come as any sort of surprise that we need to focus on attorney mental health and wellness. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety, depression, and substance use. And for those of you that can see on the screen, I know it's lunchtime, and yes, there's a pizza there. In fact, it's a pepperoni pizza that has no relevance to this presentation at all. I like pizza. I just put it there, period. So don't draw any symbolism from this other than if we ever get together one day and you want to have a pepperoni pizza with me, I will certainly partake. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety. If you know what this is, if you've ever played it, you'll see why I think it's an appropriate representation for anxiety, which is somebody is pulling out a Jenga block. And for those of you that have never played the Jenga game, imagine building a tower of wooden blocks where if you pull the wrong one at one time, the entire tower will collapse. The people around you will chuckle and point and say you lost the game. But the reality is playing Jenga, if you're an anxious person, can be more stressful than if you are not predisposition towards anxiety. So that's how I lead this off. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is basically an emotion which is characterized by feelings of intense tension, excessive and persistent worry, fearful thoughts, restlessness. It can actually be what we call rumination, where we kind of engage in this endless loop of catastrophizing. Bad things can happen. We can't really see the goodness around us. We can only focus on the negative. But the reality about anxiety is this. Every one of us on this call and every one of us has days where we're nervous, we're stressed, or we're frightened. That's normal. That's to be expected. But the key difference is knowing when you're stressed and when you're distressed. Stress, normal, expected. Distress, something we want to look at. Now, what can you see that somebody who is experiencing severe anxiety might be showing us as a sign? Well, they could avoid situations that trigger or worsen their symptoms. And that can affect their family, personal, and professional relationships. Okay. So we always want to be vigilant about, somebody's behavior. And in that, if somebody is a gregarious person all of a sudden, and they seem to become less gregarious, or if somebody was not really particularly nervous about something and now they seem to be preoccupied with that, we may want to look into that a little bit. Hallmarks of anxiety, they're all different. Everybody will experience them differently. You may experience all of them. You may experience one or two. But it generally means a nervousness, a panic, a feeling of impending doom, increased heart rate, sweating, trembling, feeling weak or tired, difficulty concentrating. Panic attacks are a subset of anxiety that has manifested itself in a very crippling way. But that's just the general overview. Yeah, now today is a very broad view, but that is an overview of anxiety. Now, when I present, I am very open about my lived experience with anxiety. And the reason why I'm open about it is because I really do believe that the more we are open about these things, we shine a light on something. Rather than this being an abstract lecture about data, I like to personalize it. And I don't do it in any way, shape, or form for sympathy or pity or concern. Absolutely none needed, none wanted, none desired. I share it because I want you to know, number one, it's common. Number two, anybody going through it is not alone. And number three, there are really helpful resources that we can use, both medically, educationally, professionally, to help us with this. But the way I share my story is this. So when I graduated law school, which was before the internet, that's all you need to know. What I can tell you is that I joined a very large firm in Philadelphia. I was the second Gator to ever get hired there. And my responsibility, not surprisingly, as a first-year associate, was limited to research and writing. I would march dutifully down the hall. They would say, Joe, we need you to write a memo on a very scintillating topic like blue sky securities laws in a non-jury collateral estoppel jurisdiction. I would faithfully write my memo. I would then hand it in, and I would go about my business. And it wasn't very stressful for me because that's what we learned in law school, legal research and writing. Now, fast forward. I'm from South Florida, originally from Miami Beach, and I came home and I joined a very large law firm, one of the biggest in the state at the time. And on the first day I went in, my boss, who is still a dear, dear friend, who was at my wedding and I love dearly, but my boss came in and he had a stack of files about this big. And I remember what they looked like, but more importantly, I remember the sound when he slapped them on my desk. And with a big grin, he says, "Joe, these are yours. You're going to be a real lawyer." Well, a lot of people would have said, "Hooray, I don't have to research and write anymore. Hooray, I can actually talk to the client. Hooray, I can actually litigate. I can actually try a case." For me, I analogize it to getting hit in the head with a bat. It's the only way I can. I just was struck by fear, paralyzed by terror, and frankly, lasted 9 months, just long enough to have a baby. And I will never forget that experience because back then, and I'll tell you the year, it was 1991, nobody talked about this stuff. I had to find a psychiatrist in the yellow pages, if you remember what those were. And I shuffled off to this gentleman, very kind guy, but it was really in its infancy. I did a couple sessions and that was it. Nothing, couldn't get anywhere. And I had to make a decision. And I, regretfully left, big law. And so I share that because I just want people to put a face to anxiety and know that I survived, I thrived, and so can anybody. And you can always give somebody that hope. One of the things that I teach is, we like to give hope with facts, right? But the truth is, and I'll say it later in the presentation, most people with proper help, if they need it, can and do get better. And that is very important to remember for everybody. Most people with proper help can and do get better. Now, we shift gears. So I call this segment Alone in the Dark. And this is an introduction into depression. So we've talked about anxiety. Now we're going to move to depression. So again, like anxiety, we can have a stressful day, stressful week. Depression is similar. We can have a bad day. We all have had bad days. We've all had bad weeks, but it would be unusual if we didn't. But that's not clinical depression as defined by a professional. Depression as a mental illness is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects the way you feel, the way you think, and the way you act. If anybody's ever had a lived experience with depression or had anybody close to them living with depression, I can promise you it is not pleasant. Fortunately, I have never been depressed, but I've had people very close to me in my orbit that have been clinically depressed. And the one thing that they've all said to me, and what the evidence tells us is we think we're helpful sometimes if we say, "Oh, just snap out of it." I promise you, anybody struggling with clinical depression, if they could snap out of it, they would, because nobody wants to feel that way. So remember that it is an illness. There is effective treatment, but no, telling an anxious person to relax or telling a depressed person to snap out of it is generally unhelpful. It is not going to move the ball forward for that particular person's recovery. What about depression? What might we see? Well, we know sadness is kind of a generic term, but if you find somebody has lost their interest in normally pleasurable activities, if you see that they're sleeping a lot or perhaps not sleeping at all, if they're not eating or overeating, if they're feeling worthless, guilty, if they're having thoughts of death or suicide, it would be easier if I was gone. Those type of statements, if they appear disheveled, unkempt, missing deadlines, sloppy work, these could be hallmarks of depression that we might see. Okay. Depression has come a long way with treatment options. For anxiety, options include cognitive behavioral therapy, which is talk therapy, medication as prescribed by a healthcare professional. Depression has cognitive behavioral therapy as well as medication, but there are increased treatments for depression, treatment-resistant depression. Electroconvulsive therapy, sometimes rudimentarily referred to as shock therapy, has progressed tremendously. There is electromagnetic therapy. There is ketamine. There are many, many treatment options that professionals and professionals alone can provide. Again, hope with facts. The third leg of the stool today is it a party or is it a problem? So we're going to talk briefly about substance use. And you know me being anxious, right? I look at this picture and what makes me anxious? Well, I'm going to tell you. The gentleman with the plaid jacket, the red and black plaid jacket, is holding a beer. That doesn't make me anxious. What makes me anxious is seeing all those sparklers in that unauthorized light display. That makes me nervous, right? But we're going to talk about substance use. Now, here's an overview. I'm the last person to tell anybody how to live their lives, what to do, anything. It's just, I don't do it. It's not my place. But what I'm going to tell you is that when it comes to substances, a lot of us use and enjoy substances in moderation. And when I refer to substances, I'm talking about alcohol for our session. So one of the most popular and legal substances consumed among attorneys, not surprisingly, is alcohol. And the reason why is because it's legal, right? We're always afraid of that. It's accessible, it's socially accepted, and, you know, it can be a tension breaker, you know, it can reduce our anxiety and our stress. So it's not about use. It's when use morphs into a substance use disorder. And that is, again, it is a disease that affects a person's brain and behavior, and that leads to an inability to control the use of that drug or medication. Now, look, alcohol, nicotine, they're legal, but they're still drugs. The reason why people may have a substance use problem is because it's a way to relieve their feelings of anxiety or depression. We call it a negative coping strategy. It's a coping strategy. The substance allows us to get along in our daily lives. It masks the underlying problem, but it's a negative coping strategy. And so one of the things we like to talk about is positive coping strategies. Simply put, exercise, meditation, diet, friendships, hobbies, relationships. Those are positive coping strategies. Anytime we're using a substance, whether it be prescribed or even over the counter, it could be as much as drinking a bottle of NyQuil to go to bed every night, or taking 3 Benadryl to go to sleep at night, right? Those are legal substances, but they're being used in a way to mask feelings that might better be addressed. Now, substance use has a unique relationship with anxiety and depression, which is substance use lives very comfortably with them. It's like they're great roommates. So you can have anxiety, depression, and substance use comorbidly existing, and it's a beautiful thing in terms of a clinical presentation. At the same time, people say to me all the time, they go, Joe, aren't anxiety and depression opposite? How can you be anxious and depressed? You're either one or the other. And the answer is no. You can actually be suffering from anxiety and depression at the same time. And the reason why is it's deceptively simple. Somebody who is depressed can become anxious because they want to know when their depression will ebb or lift. Somebody who is anxious can become depressed because they don't know when their anxiety will quell or end. So anxiety, depression, and substance use, yes, they all live together. You can have anxiety and depression living together. You could have depression and substance use living together, but they're all on the lease, my friends. Or if you want, they're all on the deed. Okay? So substance use, again, requires professional help. And I know it's a half an hour into the presentation and you're saying, Joe, this is all well and good. I appreciate this information. You're talking at such a fast clip because there's so much you want to share, and there is. But Joe, I'm a lawyer and I'm not a therapist or a doctor or a counselor. And guess what? Neither am I. I am a lawyer. I'm a mental health first aid instructor, but I'm a lawyer. I'm a layperson, just like most of us, if not everybody. I am a layperson. I am not a therapist. I don't diagnose, I don't treat, I don't cure. Okay? But does that mean we're powerless? Absolutely not. we have tremendous ability to make positive influences in our lives, our colleagues' lives, our families' lives, our friends' lives. So let me share some things. So obviously I'm biased. I'm a mental health first aid instructor and I teach it around the country. So I admit it, I'm biased. But it was my mandate on the Florida Bar Special Committee because Dr. Mehra, Rahul Mehra, who is a friend, he is a double board certified psychiatrist. And we were trying to figure out an educational vehicle that I, as a layperson, could teach to other lay people. And Rahul said to me, have you thought about mental health first aid? And I said, I have no idea what it is. So I took the course, I liked it, and then I got certified to teach it in 2018. So basically, I like to tell people that this is a course like CPR or first aid. Anybody can learn it, anybody can do it. And it's an evidence-based skills program that allows us as lay people to provide initial help and support to somebody that might be developing a mental health or substance use problem or experiencing a crisis. The program is taught as a protocol. So there's actually a protocol that we use, and we cover mental health challenges ranging from anxiety all the way up through and including suicide, which is a significant problem in our population. The bar has approved it for 8.5 hours of CLE because, yes, it is a long class. It is 8.5 hours. But what I always like to tell people is if you were able to save a life or help somebody, it was worth every minute. And the good news is that not only do I teach it, but I've had to use it. And it has been very helpful. It has been very helpful. So that's my pitch on mental health first aid, something we can do as lay people to help other people. Now, when we talk about a helping hand, what else can we do? What else can we do? And regarding this slide, yes, I'm anxious that these climbers don't have ropes on them, but we'll let that go. So here are some things that we can do right now without any training other than reading this slide with me. What we can do is, how do we respond to our colleagues, families, and friends? Well, the one thing all of us have, fortunately, is 2 ears. We all have the capacity to listen non-judgmentally. And that phrase non-judgmentally means a heck of a lot. And let me explain why. When we listen, and I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody else. When we listen, sometimes we're listening to respond. Sometimes we're listening, but we're formulating our answer. Listening non-judgmentally means exactly what it says. It means we are only listening. We are taking in what the person is saying. We're not forming an opinion. We're not forming a judgment. We're literally giving them the space to speak freely without our feeling a need to immediately respond. When we listen non-judgmentally, it means that we meet somebody where they are, not where we think they should be. And let's be real. Me, you, and everybody else, we all probably have ideas of where people should be. Meaning, if somebody comes to you with a problem or a challenge, you probably have a sense of where they should be under your construct. But that's not listening non-judgmentally. Listening non-judgmentally is meeting them where they are at that moment in time. Now, what else can we do? All of us can be encouraging, we can all be supportive, and we can all provide credible information. And notice the word credible in front of information. The bottom line is there is a lot of credible information available on the internet. Very good information. Correspondingly, there's a lot of garbage on the internet, which is not credible and frankly could be dangerous. So how do you know the difference? Well, I'm going to give you credible resources towards the end of our presentation. I'm going to share with you resources that I believe are credible. And I think you'll agree if you look at them that you'll find that they can give you a starting point for information. The main thing, though, is, again, when we are listening to somebody and giving them that space, we're not diagnosing them, treating them, or curing them. We've got guardrails on, right? We've got our guardrails on. We know our limitations. We leave the diagnosis, treatment, and cure to the professionals, but that doesn't mean that we can't encourage, support, and provide credible information. I've told this to you. I'm going to say it again. The evidence, not what I say, the evidence is clear. With proper, timely, professional treatment, most people can and do get better. However, the sooner the help is provided, the better potential for a favorable outcome. The sooner it is provided, the better potential for a favorable outcome. And people say, but Joe, why the delay between feeling a certain way and getting help? And that segues into the next bullet point. The shame and the stigma and the misinformation regarding mental health, unfortunately, has been so pervasive and cultivated through so many different channels that we and you and the members of any organization committed to this, we spend a good chunk of our time destigmatizing this. And the way I destigmatize it is I tell people, if you had a broken arm, are you going to set it yourself? Are you going to ignore it? No, you're going to go to the emergency room and get an x-ray. If you find out you've got high blood pressure, are you going to ignore it? No, you could have a stroke. You're going to take medication, perhaps exercise, perhaps improve your diet. If you have a cavity, you're going to ignore it until you need a root canal? No, you're going to go to the dentist. Well, guess what? Your brain is an organ just like your heart, liver, lungs. It deserves equal dignity. And so stigma is what prevents people. There is nothing to be ashamed about. I understand that different cultures have different responses and different feelings about mental health treatment. Culture pervades this entire discussion. I know that. But what I'm saying to you is that we all collectively have a responsibility to stop this labeling, stop this stereotyping, and stop people who need help from feeling ashamed from getting it. I will go to my grave on this point. There is nothing to be ashamed about. It is not a sign of weakness. You are not a bad person. You are simply a person that recognizes they may need some help. Now, at the same time, one of the things that is important to remember is taking care of you. You are useless to your clients. You are useless to your family. You are useless to your friends. Frankly, you're useless to yourself if you don't take care of you. Because if you aren't doing well, how can you be expected to help your clients and help your family and your friend and your colleagues? And the answer is you can't. Self-care is not selfish. I, again, speak from the heart with this. Does it mean you need to go to the gym 5 days a week and bench press 800 pounds? No. Does it mean you need to, only eat organic food that is, harvested in a special way on a full moon? No. Doesn't mean that. But it does mean that we need to be aware of the fact that if we are not taking stock in ourselves, we simply are not going to be able to be the best that we can be. Now, for those of you that supervise people, and I'm assuming some people are mentors and have people, what I'm going to tell you about that is very simple. Be a mentor. Check in on your team, whether they're lawyers, paraprofessionals, doesn't matter who they are. Check in with your team. Guide them through their fears, right? A lot of times, this is not about somebody being lazy. It's about somebody that's scared, uncertain. For new lawyers, imposter syndrome runs rampant, right? It's not that their people are lazy, but we want to guide them through their fears. In retrospect, when I started practicing, and there's certainly no blame when I say this, when I started practicing, if perhaps there had been more of a robust dialogue about mental health, perhaps there might have been a way for me to have salvaged that career. Because it wasn't for lack of effort, lack of, desire, but the fear was crippling. So If you're going to be a mentor, be a mentor. But being a mentor not only addresses somebody's substantive concerns about the practice area, but it addresses the holistic concerns. How you doing? And a lot of people, when you ask them how you doing, they're going to tell you one of two things. I'm fine, or I'm hanging in there. Rarely will they tell you they're not doing well. So a lot of people are fine, which is perfect, right? That's what we would love, everybody to be fine. But watch out when somebody tells you they're fine if their actions don't measure up to what you see. And if somebody tells you they're hanging in there, you really might want to ask them twice. You doing okay? At the same time, none of us have the ability or the right or the reason to force anybody to tell us anything. This is, people have the right to share what they want and withhold what they want. But if somebody does have the ability and the confidence to share with you, it should be obviously treated confidentially, privately, unless there are obviously grave exceptions to those rules. So there's a lot we can do. And I think you've seen what we can do. And there's myriads of things. Now, resources. Resources are so important because if we don't know where to go and we don't know where to look, then we really just are wheels that are spinning in the sand and we're not moving forward. So I like to share Florida resources first, and then I like to move to national resources. And by the way, you'll notice this slide is particularly labeled selected Florida resources. There's a lot more. There are many, many more resources in Florida, but I give you some of the ones that may be most appropriate for our population, which is, people in the legal profession. So number one is the Florida Lawyers Assistance Program. I've given you the phone number there. They're online as well. I've had the fortune years ago of training them in mental health first aid. I've had the fortune of knowing them over the years. I think they do incredible work. People have a misperception about Florida Lawyers Assistance, and that is that they, quote, only work with drunk lawyers or lawyers, quote, that are in trouble with the bar. That is a subset of what they do. That is not nearly the full complement of services they can offer and the referrals they can make. So if anybody has questions, you don't have to have a substance use problem, nor do you have to be in trouble with the bar. You can voluntarily call them. It is confidential, and something which I highly encourage anybody that may have a concern about a lawyer or a concern about themselves to reach out. They'll also speak to law students, to paraprofessionals as well, is my understanding. The Florida Bar, again, tremendous credit paid to the Florida Bar for this. Starting in 2017, when the special committee was formed, the bar really, really stepped up and took this seriously. And as a result of that, the FloridaBar.org website has helpful information, helpful links. They're really, I'm grateful for them really supporting us. I've had conversations, with members of the Florida Supreme Court at varying points in times. They weren't long conversations, but they were brief. But from the two justices that I had spoken to, they were very supportive of mental health initiatives, which really warmed my heart. Another thing is the Florida Bar Lawyers Helpline. So let me explain this. As a Florida Bar member, you are entitled to up to 5 free, yes, I said free, which means it costs nothing, sessions with a licensed therapist. Basically, all you do is call that number. They do a screening intake, and then they assign you with a therapist. I have used it twice for myself, and each time the process was smooth. It was efficient. The sessions with the therapist were what you would expect they would be, roughly an hour, and we would talk by Zoom. Learned some helpful things, and I was grateful for the resource. So we want you to know that that exists, and it is confidential. 211 is another organization you can reach out to. They have quite a bit of credible mental health referral and other educational information. So you can see all of that at 211.org or dial 211. Finally, for Florida, if you call 911 for a mental health crisis, an emergent mental health crisis, it's very important that you do a few things. Number one is ask the dispatcher for a crisis intervention officer and tell the dispatcher this is a mental health crisis situation or a suicide situation. A crisis intervention officer is somebody that has been specially trained in mental health crisis management and can be the difference between a favorable and less favorable outcome. The other thing is to tell the dispatcher whether the person has a weapon or is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So remember, if you call 911 for a mental health crisis, let them know it's a mental health crisis or a suicide. Ask for a crisis intervention officer. Tell them if there is a weapon involved or if the person is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. National resources. So we're going to talk a little bit about national resources. Okay, so in the umbrella of the universe, we've got 988, and I really want everybody to please put this in your phone. This is the number you dial, literally 988, to connect you with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This is for everyone. You do not have to be suicidal to call it. You can have questions about suicide. You can be concerned about somebody who may be suicidal. You may have other questions about severe mental health challenges. It is a resource. It is there for your use. You can also text them, but 988 can be called. You can have somebody that may be very depressed and potentially suicidal. They can be sitting next to you. You can call 988. Okay, there's no reason not to call it if you feel any sort of need to call it. Better to call it than not call it. No question is too small. I also put the website up there. For those that may be listening that know judges, there's actually a helpline for judges. And the American Bar Association and the Institute for Wellness and Law, IWIL, again, have a lot of resources that are national in scope, can be helpful. Finally, we've got Alcoholics Anonymous, United Way, and NAMI, and I'll talk to NAMI in a second. Regarding Alcoholics Anonymous, this is a 12-step program. Some people believe in them, some people don't. It's not my position to tell you which to believe or which not to believe, but what I will say is that there's an anonymous program for almost everything. For some people, it can be a life-saving thing. If you are a family member or a colleague or a friend of somebody that may have a substance use problem and they're not interested in attending an anonymous program, you can go to, for example, Al-Anon and be among similarly situated friends and family members of somebody that may be struggling with a substance use disorder. Again, a resource that I need you to know about. The United Way, that's the 211. And then finally, NAMI. I'm horribly biased. I do volunteer work with NAMI. NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They have wonderful, wonderful, wonderful statewide and nationwide, robust, credible resources. They offer many programs to the community that are free. They're just, I can't sing their praises enough. And I've referred many people to NAMI. They exist in every county, I believe, or if not every county, most counties. I work closely with the Palm Beach County NAMI, and they've been nothing short of wonderful, wonderful, caring human beings. So NAMI has just, I encourage everybody to get familiar with NAMI, especially if somebody, could benefit from their help. So those really, are the resources. We've covered the basics. I know that this just scratches the surface, and I understand that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that's what it's designed to be, because it's designed to be a lunch and learn. So, as I kind of conclude, we always leave some space open for, questions which can be, shared. And to the extent that they can be answered, I'm happy to try to answer them. I'm fairly straightforward. If I can't answer it, don't know the answer, I'm just going to tell you I don't know. But I really genuinely hope that this helped and people have some takeaways, a little more confidence, and recognize there's a lot more we can all do. And we are not helpless. We are not helpless in this struggle to make this a better, safer, more healthy profession. So with that, Max, I turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you so much for being here and for this amazing presentation and benefit for all of our members here today. You can find a lot more information about Joe and other information that the Elder Law section has for our members on our section's website at www.eldersection.org. Thank you for joining all of us here today for our ongoing Laws Over Lunch series. I don't think we have any questions in our Q&A series.
Hey, Max. Hey.
Yes, Victoria.
Hey, everybody. Joe, thank you so much for being here. I do have a couple questions I tried to post in the Q&A. It wouldn't let me, but here are the two questions, Joe. The first one is, talk about the confidentiality if someone calls into one of the Florida resources, or sorry, not calls in, writes perhaps an email, a text, some other form of written communication. Are those communications equally as confidential, and are they not subject to discovery by another person or an entity? Like, help us with the barriers that people might be nervous about in calling and or writing and disclosing things about themselves or someone else.
Fair question. I'm going to answer it directly, which is, I don't know. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. If you ask me to guess, I would say that it should be confidential, because why would a call be treated different than an email or a text? But for purposes, since it's recorded, I'm going to say I don't know. The easiest way to get an answer to that would be probably to simply call the entity itself and just ask the question, right, before you actually engage their services. Is this completely confidential? Anytime I've had any exposure to them, Florida Lawyers Assistance, I've been told it's completely confidential. But I don't want to ever mislead anybody or give somebody the wrong advice. So my advice would be to call them and just say, are my emails and texts or communications completely confidential? But I believe that they are.
And then my second question goes to the resources. If people wanted to tap into, let's say, personal counseling through a Florida bar resource, is that available? And would it be available by virtual, counseling? A lot of people are tapping into that these days.
Yeah. So I had mentioned, towards the end of the presentation, I talked about, the Florida Well program, which allows Florida bar members to get up to 5 free counseling sessions with a licensed therapist. And all you have to do is call the number, which I, was in the resources, and they can connect you with a counselor, and that is confidential and it is free, and you get up to 5 sessions.
Nice. Great. Thank you so much.
Per year. So if you were really creative and you were having a challenge the last few weeks of December, then you could have 10 sessions in relatively short succession, because it does roll over. People do utilize it. And, we have a couple more minutes. Let me just, Max, we have a couple more minutes to tell about a few things. So here's the thing that I share with people about therapy is that, having a relationship with a therapist, is very personal and very individual. So if you, for example, were to reach out and speak to a therapist and you just, you didn't click, it's okay to tell the therapist you prefer to try somebody else. Therapists would appreciate knowing that because they know that one size does not fit all. So don't ever hesitate to try a different therapist, because these are such personal relationships that you will develop, that, don't be discouraged. Okay. Don't be discouraged. It's okay to try, 1, 2, 3. I've known people that have, tried 4 or 5. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Don't feel that you're a failure or the system is broken because the first person wasn't right for you. They might be right for somebody else.
Yeah, and Joe, if you don't mind, just so that I can tell everyone who's here, what you and I were talking about, that hotline that Joe just mentioned from the Florida Bar, is actually overseen by the Big Bar Committee that I'm a member of. And the data that actually is collected on it is how many calls it receives. And it is the #1 called Florida Bar hotline, the one that Joe just mentioned, the one that you can get the free therapy sessions from if you're an attorney. More people in the last year, and it's actually pretty consistent year over year, have actually called that number than the Florida Bar Lawyer Referral Service number. So we don't know, the contents of those conversations, obviously, because I can say that information is not monitored. But we just know that more people, specifically attorneys, are using that number. And so if you are thinking about it, you're not alone. It is the most popular number. And I think there are 4 different types of hotlines that the Florida Bar operates. And I think that's the most widely used. So according to the data that we have on file.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear that, Max. It is. I did not know that statistic. But having been a user of it, I can tell you, I mean, it does work. I'm not speaking from a theoretical standpoint. You can get connected. And the other thing is, you don't have to call that hotline if it's just about you. You could have a concern about a family member, a friend. You could, people talk to therapists about people, that they're concerned about to learn techniques, communication techniques. So it's not, you don't have to be suffering your own personal crisis. Like to kind of pull the lens back on. It's a resource for you and to help you navigate relationships with others, aside from, navigating relationships, with yourself.
Well, are there any other questions, Emily, that you're receiving? Because I think Brooks just has a comment that I'll just share, that there are also therapists who specialize in certain things, so keep looking for the right fit, which is absolutely correct.
And the other thing I'll add to that too is, I want everybody to understand something. If you try to reach a therapist or a psychiatrist, especially, don't be surprised if it's going to take a while for some of them to be seen, because the demand, people, there's so much stigma and shame, yet the fact is, it's very difficult to get an appointment with a psychiatrist very quickly, or, a well-known therapist very quickly, because the demand is so great, which is kind of the irony about this whole thing. So don't be discouraged. Keep trying until you can find a provider that can help you. Okay. Any other questions, Max?
I think that is it. So let me just read us out, and I'll let you, Joe, say goodbye. And if anyone has any final questions as I'm reading out the outro, we'll let them come in. But just wanted to thank everyone, and especially Joe, for joining us for our Laws Over Lunch series. And this part of our membership benefit program. We hope you'll continue to join us for these live webinar programs. And if you have any suggestions for other topics related to elder law or other membership issues related to the section, or how to manage your practice that you'd like to hear about, please don't hesitate to reach out to Danielle Fowler, chair of the CL or outgoing chair of the CLE committee, or to me or someone on the membership committee, or of course anyone directly on the executive team. So and we have some thank yous coming in, and that's definitely for Joe and not for me. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, thank you all. And Victoria, in closing, first of all, thank all of you for attending. And Victoria, it's nice that we were able to put this together, right? It was quite a while.
It was great. No, it was so great. I can't hear this topic enough, Joe. I really can't. So thank you again for your time today.
It's my pleasure. Be well, everybody. Be well. Thank you.
All right. Take care.